Good morning and happy Friday. For those of you that are new, welcome. For those of you that are returning, welcome back to the Torque and Thrust Talk Show, episode number 28, Glorifying Darkness. My name is Bill, and I've been an airline pilot for the past 7.5 years, hold 5 FAA type ratings, and currently fly the Boeing 737 for a major U.S. airline. My co host is fellow co founder of the Three Green Simulations Group, retired NYC EMT and flight sim extraordinaire Tommy D of Level Flight Simulations. On this week's shows, we are talking about the FAA relocation of air traffic controllers in New York, the end of an era saying goodbye to the Grand Tour, and Tommy's gaming update talking about indie games. Then we will learn industry terms with jargon in a jiffy, learn from past accidents with safety stand down, live listener Q&A, and our discussion this week, Glorifying Darkness, Joseph Emerson, a pilot mental health martyr or criminal. And as you could probably tell, Tommy D doesn't have a video feed today. Unfortunately, we started having technical difficulties about 10 minutes prior to the show and weren't able to resolve them. So right now, Tommy D is just going to be audio only. But Tommy D, how are you doing this morning?
Doing really, really well, Bill. How about yourself this morning?
Good. Despite the technical difficulties, we do apologize for the hiatus there. July, everything was scheduled out to go. Then we had some scheduling conflicts kind of come up, and then some other things come up in August. So we've been kind of off the ball or fell off the wagon, I guess, if you want to say, for producing the podcast. But the good news is we've figured out a schedule that works. It's going to be mostly Fridays and one Thursday at the end of this month to roll us into our 1 year anniversary coming October 5th for the Torque and Thrust Talk Show. But how's everything going? It's going to be a year. Yeah, working on 28 episodes. I'm sorry, on Spotify, there's only 26 posted. Once again, I'll have to go back and edit those once we get the ball back rolling again and get kind of back in the groove of things. But how's everything going at home, Tommy? Everything's caught up and ready to go?
Uh, we're at 80%. 80%. I still have some stuff in Georgia going on that'll hopefully resolve. But in the immediate home under the roof, we're doing well. We're doing well.
Well, that's good to hear.
So how's everything over
Yes.
there?
Same. Tommy's been a little busier than I have. I've just been kind of enjoying laying back, not streaming, not really content creating, just kind of enjoying life as it is, and enjoying time with my wife and my dogs here at home. Especially with things spooling up next month, I've gotten the official notification I'm going into captain training next month, starting October 15th. And the training is going to be whirlwind. Should be done probably mid-December with OE, and by the new year, hopefully, as everything goes as planned, will be a captain on the line as a Boeing 737 captain. So the studying has started. It's starting to get not a little hectic, but you may see more Microsoft Flight Simulator live streams from me utilizing the PMDG as a study tool as I go through and start practicing using that. So that's a little bit of content, as well as I've been starting to do a little more a variety gaming, if you will, on my Twitch stream, which is new and improved, which is nice. Kind of expanding beyond COD or Call of Duty and Microsoft Flight Simulator to try to find other games and a group of people to content create as well with those new games. So definitely interested in that, where that's going to take me, especially with the prospect of meeting new people and bringing them into the Three Green Simulations group. So hopefully that is successful. In that endeavor. But first, I am going to be talking about some aviation news. And this actually, I talk about a lot of different aviation news on the show, but sometimes it affects me and sometimes it doesn't, where I experience for example, like delays and stuff firsthand. But this one actually does affect me. So today, this is from Simple Flying by Channing Reed. It's an article called "No Other Place on the Planet: Why the FAA Forced Some Air Traffic Controllers to Transfer from Newark to Philadelphia." So if you weren't aware, in July, August, there was a massive transfer, not only of airspace jurisdiction, but as well as personnel from the New York TRACON, which, if you remember way back, like episode 2 or 3 of the show, I talked about the shortage, and that, some people might cite that as the New York TRACON being a kind of a good old boys club where they were very selective and would rather keep staffing there at a level that is lower than sufficient because of who they pick and how they pick, and they're very picky about who they bring in, so on and so forth. If you want more information on that, definitely go check out episode, I think it's like 2 or 3 that we talked about. It's been a while ago, almost a year ago. But back in July, August this year, the FAA actually relocated air traffic controllers from N90 to Philadelphia airspace, and also took a sliver of that airspace, the N90 airspace, and gave it to Philadelphia Tracon. The reason is because of the staffing shortages in the Tracon, New York Tracon, right? So there's some bullet points here. Staffing shortages continue in New York City's airspace. The FAA would switch some of New York's airspace jurisdiction to Philadelphia to help mitigate delays due to ATC staffing shortages, which is something we saw on the regular. I was in LaGuardia during the government shutdown, and they were doing ground delays because of staffing shortages, and those kind of rolled over through COVID and such. Whereas that they never really got better. So delays due to staffing. If someone calls out sick, then they have to do delays because of safety and so on and so forth. So it's been kind of a normal thing. If you're going to the Northeast, there's might be some sort of delay associated with it. 24 air traffic control personnel were required to relocate from Long Island, New York to Philadelphia in order to facilitate this change. Excuse me. The FAA offered the positions and compensation to cover the relocation previously. So I believe it was about 4 years ago, or maybe 2 years ago during the pandemic, the FAA actually said, hey, we need volunteers, kind of like what the airlines do before we do temporary duty. They said, hey, the FAA says, hey, we need people over here to help facilitate this lack of, or to prevent delays, basically, because of the staffing shortage that they're having basically all across the United States. It's a thing. It's kind of like them talking about the airline pilot shortage. So the FAA did offer that, as well as bonuses and compensation to cover the move to Philadelphia from N90 Tracon. But this is where the problem comes. This is where why the article is a little misleading, because the article is like, well, they forced them. Well, no, they offered a voluntary and compensation package for them to move. But then when nobody moved, the FAA said, well, okay, we're going to move you. So for those of you that aren't aware, when you're an air traffic controller, especially not a private air traffic controller, so you work for the FAA, the NTSB, or not NTSB, excuse me, the Department of Transportation, you're, as part of your job, you're required to relocate as the job sees fit. So if the government says, I need you here for this, for your job as an air traffic control, you have to do it. It's part of the job description when you sign up to do it. It's kind of like in airlines, kind of the same thing. We have what's called TDY. They first offer it as voluntary, and then there's perks and compensation for if you do it voluntarily. But if it doesn't become voluntarily, or if nobody does it voluntarily, then they TDY you from the most junior person up. To force you to go to TDY because they need coverage in that area. It's just part of the game. So it sounds horrible that they forced them to move, but they needed them to move, and they did offer compensation to allow them to move initially. Now, this transition did cause daily ground delay programs for the Northeast, and the reason this is more me, it wasn't really from the article. The article said, "Oh yeah, everybody's recovered." No. I've been flying in and out of New York the past couple of months, and there have been daily either ground stops or edict programs to facilitate with this transfer. I personally don't know the inner workings. I don't know why it's taking so long, whether it's like there's a period of time that the controllers have to move down there versus just saying tomorrow you're going to be in Philadelphia, which makes sense, right? Because we can't just teleport from one place or the other. And also commuting from, New York, depending on where you're living, to New Jersey or to Philadelphia may not be the easiest commute day to day. So I don't know how that works, if their staffing levels have gone fully up or what it was. But during that time, during that transition in August, I've experienced multiple about hour to hour and a half to maybe 2 hour delays going into Newark and the New York airspace. Like I said, as of right now, I think they have it figured out, but I definitely felt the impact of that as an airline pilot trying to get to New York, just because of that transfer. Actually, and I saw another article, kind of unrelated. The New York airspace had an equipment outage and was causing major delays this past week. So um, it's kind of an interesting thing that the struggles. It's one of our busiest airspace in the Northeast part of the United States, and it's interesting that we're seeing so many struggles with that, especially with staffing. And I'm going to have to bring in the resident New Yorker here, Tommy D, who's a native, and we've talked about this before back in, like I said, episode 2, episode 3, about the shortage that's happening up there. So, Tommy, when you hear that they're forcing air traffic controllers to relocate as someone who is part of the traveling public, is that sound safe, or do you think it warrants the delays that we're getting? Tommy D. Okay. Uh, you there, Tommy D? If you are, you're muted, buddy. See, this is the hard thing without having a camera feed. I don't know if Tommy's like physically sitting in his chair, but he might be up getting something. So we'll digress from that. But my point being is that um the ground delay programs serve as mostly as a delay or as a delay program to allow um basically to allow more spacing between aircraft to reduce the number of aircraft going in because per I believe per controller there is a certain level of traffic that they can handle. Once they go over that level or they lose someone, like they call in sick or they don't have enough staffing, then they have to reduce that level, which causes delays in the Northeast. um all right, I'm gonna try to bring Tommy back in. Oh, Tommy. Yeah, we can't hear Tommy for whatever reason. So the technical difficulties continue. He's not muted on my side. He's messaging me on Discord as we speak. But yeah, and he lost his microphone now. So this could we'll just kind of keep him up just in case he recovers from the technical difficulties, so that way we can hear him. But yeah, so the issue is the ground delay programs, and that as a traveling public is what you're going to be experiencing the most. Like you probably never until hopefully until this show maybe have not heard of it, but now that you know that there's delays when there's weather outside.
Hello?
There you
Hello
go.
now? All
Yeah, welcome.
right.
Got to turn you down again. All right. So the question for you was, as a person of the traveling public, and especially as a New Yorker, you and I talked about in the past an episode. I think it was like two or three about the shortage because of the good old Bowery Club in '90 or the New York Trade Con, and now the FAA has forced them to move to Long Island, or I'm sorry, to Philadelphia, and that's covering or that's causing shortages in terms of delays and stuff. Is that would that be frustrating for the traveling public, or is that something that you'd see as reasonable as transferring personnel would cause such a
Well, so we're looking one, it's gonna be extremely frustrating. We are looking at people that have been there forever, and I do remember that conversation. That was a great
yeah.
episode to where, um, people have been established at New York TRACON out there on the island, not too far from Isolate, forever. They have homes, they have mortgages, kids in school, daily, everyday life. It just happens to be their job as a controller. And to up and move them to Philly, uh, especially the tenured people, one, if you work whatever the hours are of the day shift for that controlling slot, you're looking at every bit of a 3 to 4 hour commute getting from the island to Philly. Two, I understand they're probably gonna back up people initially as the rollover starts and things like that. But how easy is it to sell a house, pick up and move a couple states away?
But
Just on
and
the
here's
human aspect.
well, and remember it's only 24, so it's probably the most 24. And remember, in government jobs, the tenure doesn't really exist. If the FAA says you got to move to support the air traffic control mission, that you got to move. That's
Yeah,
part of
yeah.
being an air traffic controller.
Right,
Um,
the quote
and
unquote
it's only
as
20.
business needs.
Yeah, and it's only 24, so it's probably the 24 most junior. Now, and don't forget, they did offer about 2 years ago, they did offer bonuses and compensation packages to move down. So it wasn't like they woke up one morning and said, "Hey, you're moving to Philly." So it's I understand you're talking about picking up, but they had 2 years. They knew this was coming for 2 years. Um,
And right, but
but my question is I don't, and as a even as a pilot, I didn't understand one, why do they have to physically relocate? For example, New York Center sometimes controls Bermuda approach because they have the software capability of seeing the radar down in Bermuda, right? So my question is why not still have them in the same location in New York, but have them working the Philly sector? You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
I don't understand the movement from physically saying you have to move from N90 Tracon Center to Philadelphia approach. And realistically, the only thing us pilots, the only change is instead of New York approach, when we're going to Newark with my company, it is Newark approach now. That's it, and the delays, the hour and a half delays that we've experienced. So I don't know. It's just kind of weird. I understand why they do it for staffing and stuff like that, but with today's technology, I wasn't sure why they hadn't just like remotely had them change. You know what I mean?
I don't know,
So
and like you said, we the technology is available because let's face it, Bermuda is not exactly around the corner from the East Coast of
no,
the United States,
nope.
and the way that I understand the 2 years and stuff like that, but I I don't see where there's an increase in safety there. I really,
Well, no,
really don't.
it's they're covering that sector. That's the thing is they're moving it around. The 24 people that moved is for staffing, I think, in the Philadelphia airspace as well. It is short staffed. I mean, we did talk about that. In general, air traffic control is short staffed, but New York is one of the worst state at the episode. I think it was Simple Flying stated it was 50% at one point, which is well below, which causes traveling public delays. So I'm kind of on the FAA side with this a little bit. Especially like I said, as an airline pilot, someone who's experiencing the delays regularly. Part of our culture is getting people moving people on time, because if we don't move people on time, we become unreliable like Amtrak, which we also talked about. Then people don't won't use the airlines as much, and then we kind of lose the whole purpose and intent of the airlines as well, which is number one, being safe, but also being a caring airline and efficient airline. So, and despite, if the staffing is low and the air traffic control is falling below levels to where they can um, get people in on slots on time, then I think we're losing the point, because the whole point of air traffic control is to the expeditious flow and IFR separation of aircraft. So if the government says, "Hey, we need you to move to N90 for a more efficient plan to get airplanes moving," then I support it. And at first I was like, That's so terrible." Like, just overnight, like relocating a bunch of controllers to Philadelphia when it could have been localized. But then I was reading and researching and found out that they had 2 years. It's just nobody took it. Nobody said, "I'm going to move." So they, like I said, then the FAA came in and said, "You're going to move." It's the same thing with the airlines. If the airlines need temporary duty pilots in another base, they're going to first offer it up as a volunteer to get certain compensation and stuff for it. But if push comes to shove, they'll go to the bottom of the seniority list and say, "All right, we do need coverage here. So junior pilot 1 through 5, you're going to this base for a month because we need coverage in that
Now,
base."
if it was temporarily for a month, so I believe if it was temporary for a month, that wouldn't be so bad, because people have family, friends, and stuff like that, couch crashing and stuff like that. So that's not exactly too terrible. It's the people who already bought homes and have established themselves
Yeah, I
around the
will. Okay,
area.
I will agree to that, because I just bought or sold my house that I bought in 2020 and bought this one, and it is a pain. It really is a pain. And I did it in a much smaller market than the Northeast. So I do understand the difficulty in that. But if you knew it was coming for 2 years, you know what I mean? Like, and also if you knew, like for example, if you're the bottom 24 in in 90, and you knew it was coming, I would have taken, because I think the article said they were offering $100,000 plus the cost of the move to do it. I'd take it like that. I
Yeah, I
mean,
would.
because it's either you take it and use that to put towards your new living setup or situation, or you hope that they forget, or you're not going to. 24 more people are going to be junior to you by the time that it actually occurs, and then you get nothing for it. So I don't know. It's kind of a split. Like from a like a human point like side of things, it sucks to be told, "Hey, you have to move here." But also that's what they signed up for. That's part of it. You know what I mean? Like if I went through class, because we have a Guam base for my airline. If I went into class and I was a third junior pilot and they said, "You're going to Guam on the 737," I'm going to Guam on the 737. My options are either I do it or I quit, which is quitting is wild. It'd be unheard of, especially because it's my dream airline. So it's one of those things, like I can kind of feel for them, but the fact that they were given advance notice that this was coming down the pipe, not as sympathetic or empathetic about it. But I also understand the FA's needs, because the Tommy knows every time I go into New York, Boston, anything in the Northeast, it is an absolute freaking nightmare to get in and out of there because of delays. Tommy knows it because I've been telling him for what 2 years,
Almo
going up on
almost 2 years.
3 years. Yeah, of him him and I talking about me flying and what I do for a living. So I can see what the FAA is doing. I'm hoping it's improving. I haven't been into Newark this month, but like I said, the past month it was brutal with the ground delay programs. So
Honestly, I
I'm
think
hoping it gets better.
the only airport you got in and out of unscathed within I wanna call it the
Chicago.
last year. Well, Chicago, and I don't think you had any major issues in and out of Harrisburg.
No, Harrisburg. Well, that's because Harrisburg is so tiny, and I was going to Chicago. So yeah, Harrisburg, the smaller airports aren't really as affected because there's not as much air traffic going in there, and they're generally speaking staffed to appropriate levels. It's the bigger airports and Tracon and radar approach control facilities that are experiencing this issue. So and there's other things built in there. It could be shortages because the cost of living in New York's really high, etc. There's a lot of different things that could be causing the shortage, but I'm also kind of agreeing with the FAA that things needed to change in order to facilitate and continue to facilitate. Because one thing I can tell you that is not stopping growing, well, actually, is my airline. I can't say that for other airlines because everybody stopped hiring, and that's primarily because my airline has ordered the airplanes ahead of them. So while Boeing and Airbus are taking on delays, we'll be the first ones to get them once they're out of the delays or they fix the issues that are going on. But that's causing airlines to stop hiring. But the flying and the demand is still increasing. So the FAA needs to stay ahead of the staffing levels to ensure that the system continues, or reach out to the airline to say, hey, we can't support this. So it goes by either way. But once again, as everything on this show, it is a topic that we'll probably be talking about again in the future because it's an ongoing problem with air traffic controllers as well. But with that being said, we're going to toss it over to Tommy. He's going to talk a little bit about the gaming news that he has today. And remember, he's going to be audio only. So all you're going to see is his Twitch symbol or virtual camera here because unfortunately we couldn't get the video working. But without further ado, take it away, Tommy.
Well, how you doing? Hey, hello, everybody. Good to see all of yous again, or in my case today, speak to everybody again. Um, I'm sorry I'm a little out of sorts because this technical difficulty really, really aggravated me, and I am 44 days without a cigarette, and I'm still trying to uh, cope with no nicotine. I stepped outside my comfort zone for the gaming news today. Normally, I do Fight Sim, Call of Duty, and the games that are more mainstreaming, if you will. So, when Bill and I worked out the schedule and things started to calm down family wise for me, I started looking into indie games, right? And everyone calls them indie games. And for those of you who are not familiar, they're actually independent games. They're not coming from the major developers. And what was their popularity? And some of my research statistically, in 2019, when indie games were really first starting to gain traction in the market, it was a really small percentage. Everyone looked at them as kind of like the Class C movies of the gaming world. And now here we sit in 2024, and the popularity is absolutely amazing. A lot of smaller developers have found their niche in the gaming industry and are taking off. I researched a little bit more, like what is the most popular indie game? And I was very surprised to find out that it was Minecraft. My grandchildren played Minecraft, and you just hear about it. And originally released in 2021, and for 10 years they just continually improved the game. And I as I was reading the article, I actually kind of thought to myself, I was like, maybe I'll try it. Um, with everything going on in the indie game, they're actually spending a lot less money in development, marketing, research, and things like that. Some people can make the argument that they are just mimicking the bigger games. Like, you have GTA 6 on the cusp coming out, and I know Bill just smiled because he's been waiting for that game about a week past forever. And, whatever it is, their cumulative R&D development costs that are, you have an indie game come out that's doing it for half the cost. And that's why you see a lot of indie games for free. They don't have the customer base, and they're not charging for purchase of the game, but there is in-game purchases, and that's where they make their money. And that was kinda interesting to see because everywhere now, it's, all about the microtransactions. Me personally, I refuse to give the Call of Duty, any more out of my checking account. But real quick to wrap it up, my personal opinion is looking at the research and actually looking and reading 2 or 3 different articles and looking at the actual business end of it, watching the trending. I think 2025, 2026, we're actually gonna see a couple of indie developers become major players. Like, they're gonna give, uh, Rockstar, they're gonna give, Infinity Ward a run for their money, and me personally, bring it. I would love to see that because the one thing that drives prices down is healthy competition. I forget which episode we spoke about that on, but that was a great episode. Um,
That would be
game
episode number 14, antitrust.
Yes, the antitrust, our favorite episode, I dare say.
That was well, and it's the best according to our statistics. It is the best in terms of overall watches, listens, downloads, etc. So episode number 14 is one of our best episodes that
I
we have
love
out
that
there.
episode. To tell you the truth, I'm loving this episode almost as much right now because it's kinda like the return,
It is the
minus my
return.
problems that are just making me go ballistic.
Yeah. Well, and I also feel bad because like we've been offline for 2 months, not on purpose. Like if we could have done the show, we would have done the show. And of all my content, this is the one that I care the most about. Not saying I don't put effort in my other content, but the podcast was something that I thought up of, produce, and Tommy D was nice enough to join me on the podcast to help me build what is now the Torque and Thrust Talk Show. So it obviously wouldn't have been anything without him here with me. And so it's just a lot of heart and soul goes into this show. So that's why it kind of hurts when we aren't able to do it because I know we have a variety of people that not necessarily watch it live, but I know there's a lot of people that listen to it once we edit and put it on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts as well. And I'm kind of on the fence about indie games. Yeah, they're trying to mimic some of them, but there are some really good indie games out there. And personally, I like that they're free. The ones that I play are generally free, especially the ones that I stream on Twitch. I like doing that because one, it gets them out there, if especially if they're good developed games. Because the problem is, kind of like with big business and like we talked about at antitrust, they kind of muddle and overshadow a lot of the smaller developers. So I try to support that as much as I can, especially if they're free. Because if they're free, and I love this about those games, is you can go get them. You can literally just sit there and be like, "Oh, that's free. I want to go play that," and then you can grab it and go play it with your friends or join me on stream. I always encourage people if they like a game, download it and join me while I'm streaming. So, but thanks
Yeah,
somebody for. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh, no, just 2 quick things. One, believe it or not, my last note here was bring Bill in, ask for opinion. So we
Here I
covered.
am.
We're good.
Yep.
And, I'm just gonna take a quick 30 seconds here, apologize to Bill, apologize to our friends that have been with us since the very beginning. Um, a lot of this happened with our hiatus because of things in my family that were uncontrollable. Uh,
Nope.
like I literally could not uh get a half hour to myself with everything I had going on, and to compound the problems, I was dealing with things interstate because I'm not going to get into the specifics, but it concerns my mother. And let's face it, my friends, all of us go to bat for mom.
Well,
The
in general, and also, and I've said it a million times, is this show, while we enjoy doing it, is not our primary source of income. We get $0 from doing this. In fact, I was spending money on it until recently. That's why you see the little restream markup here and stuff like that, because it's just not what restream offers for $20 a month is not worth the $20. So we don't get anything out of it. We don't try to get anything out of it. With the only real it's not even income because I haven't seen any of it is Twitch. We're both affiliates. So if you don't want ads, you pay, and that's pretty much it. But that's not going towards anything other than that. So it's and when I say that, it's family comes first. So this I hate to say it, as much as we care about the show, as soon as anything family or real life related, this show goes immediately to the bottom of the list, along with the other content creation that we do as well. So Tommy, we understand family always comes first.
Oh, dude,
Uh,
let me tell you something, brother. The day I had to text you and tell you, I mean, I can't tell you how much that broke my heart. Like, that
yeah, well, I
bothered
was
me for, geez, about the first 2 weeks. It was really, really bothering me, especially when Showtime rolled around.
Yeah,
So
well, and I was scrambling too because I like doing Bill's corners, but let's be honest, a lot of our viewer base is from your side of things. So they're here to see. A lot of them are here to see you. So it's hard to sit here and try to scramble and create an entertaining Bill's corner, knowing that the entertaining part is having discussions with you. So I was panicking too. I was like, how do we do this? How do we keep
you
this
know,
afloat while we're going on
well,
hiatus? But hey, we're back. That's all that matters.
that's it. Knock
We
on
worked
wood, and
through it.
thank God things took a great turn upwards, and we're back, everybody, and it's gonna be a
We're
lot of
back.
fun.
Yeah, it
I'm
is,
still
especially once we figure out Tommy's camera issues.
We don't wanna
Um,
talk about that. Tommy doesn't have any nicotine gum handy, so
right
we're
now.
just gonna let that ride.
Well, with that, I'll let you take a breather and I'll take over for the next bit of news here. We're going to be talking about some automotive news. Now, normally we talk about cars and stuff like that, but I want to talk about something that's kind of important to me. And actually, I'll bring Tommy back in at the end of it to kind of talk about it. I don't know about you, but especially during the pandemic, growing up, I watched off and on, I watched Top Gear with Jeremy Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May. Um, and I kind of off and on watched the show growing up. But then during the pandemic, I discovered on Amazon Prime, I discovered the Grand Tour, which is after the BBC shut down Top Gear, I should say, with those three. They went on to Amazon Prime and started making, I believe it's 5 seasons of the Grand Tour, which is kind of like what we do. It's a talk show. They talk about cars, a variety of different things. And as you know, towards the end of the Grand Tour, they started changing things into more of like a cinematic adventure type thing, which I absolutely love those episodes where they go on adventures, like driving the dune buggies across the Sahara or their boats through the Amazon and stuff like that. But unfortunately, it has been announced that the final episode of the Grand Tour, or the I guess the last like cinematic adventure, is going to be September 13th of this year, 2024. So less than about a week away. It'll be airing on Amazon Prime. And unfortunately, that is going to be it for the Grand Tour as we know it. As far as I know, I think they're going to continue the Grand Tour, but Jeremy Clarkson, James May, and Richard Hammond are not going to be on that show as the host. And if you're like me, it's like when Top Gear or like Top Gear US, when they switched it to a completely different host, it's not the same. So I'm upset. It's going to be an emotional end because, like I said, I watched them during through the pandemic. They're good, and then also their spinoffs like Clarkson's Farm is a good one on Amazon Prime. They also had James May does Japan. James May does, I think, India was another one that he did his traveling stuff as well. And then Richard Hammond also did a lot of the cool kind of like scientific invention type stuff on the side as well, which is also available on Amazon Prime. So they're just great. They're great presenters, and it's going to be a shame to see them go. Like I said, final episode is set to air September 13th of this year at 2024 on Amazon Prime. They did talk a little bit in an article to the Times about why they're planning on leaving. Because if you think they've been doing this program for over 20 years, it's been around for a while. Not the Grand Tour, but the three of them presenting card shows has been around for a while. Jeremy Clarkson, one of the heads, uh, I guess, host of the show, stated that physicality, because he is older, and you can see that on Clarkson's Farm, physicality and the content limits were driving the show to the end. They were doing a lot of physical things. One of my favorite all time episodes is when they were in Mongolia. They got airdropped an equipment kit, and that equipment kit was multiple parts to a buggy. They had to build their own buggy and then use it to get across Mongolia by themselves. Um, but that sort of stuff is very physical, and as they get older, that's more difficult, as well as the content limits. They're becoming more limited on what they could do content wise, and that includes stuff like geopolitical conflicts, as we know across the world, has really reduced set was, which was a worldwide set for the Geo to travel. Clarkson was talking about he used to be able to drive from like the Crimean to Ukraine and Turkey to all over these places, but now you can't do it because of the geopolitical conflict. So because of that, that's also limiting their content, which is another reason why the season is start or the show is coming to an end as we know it. Now that I don't think that means that like Clarkson Farms or James May does another country is not going to be, but as a group doing these adventure films that they normally do, aren't going to continue. And I believe the final episode is called "One for the Road" is what it's called. I'm bringing Tommy on this. Tommy, did you ever watch Top Gear growing up, or a Grand Tour fan?
No, no. Growing up was my automotive was a little bit different because I actually didn't have cable until I was like 16 years old, and by then I didn't wanted nothing to do with being home. My
Oh yeah,
automotive,
that
my shows were hanging out with garage in the garage. My dad was tuning up the car, or my friend's fathers, because back then when I was a kid, everybody knew everybody, and everybody was teaching the kids how to fix their own vehicle. Because why go to a
yeah,
mechanic and spend money, you know? But
yeah. And the Grand Tour,
I tried to watch it after having a conversation with you,
yeah.
and it was very interesting. It was a well done show. It was very entertaining. Just
Hmm.
I'm not my cup of tea
Yeah, that's
per
fair.
se to
And
be
I
like
honestly,
there every weekly.
yeah, and I would say I wasn't a Motorhead before the show. I mean, I was interested because I'm a pilot, so anything mechanical, that's who I am. But after that show, I became a Motorhead, and like the first part of it was very reminiscent of Top Gear, is the kind of similar format. But then as it evolved, it became more of the show that, and like they said, they changed the show because it's what they want, it's what the people wanted, which was those cinematic adventure films. So like the last four or five have just been not the talk show type, but they're on an adventure, they're somewhere in the world doing something with cars, and that's something that the audience really like, and I really enjoyed too. It's just gonna be sad to see them go. Like I said, they I watched the entire 1 through 5, um of Grand Tour when I was, locked in a house for the other than working for the pandemic, and then watch the show evolve as they were doing that. And so it is sad to see it now because, like I said, I did watch a lot of the Top Gear growing up, Top Gear UK, and then also rewatched it once I got back into the Grand Tour. But now the Grand Tour is, and mainly because they're great personalities. The three of them working together is absolutely hilarious. But if you guys have Amazon Prime, definitely go check it out. The Grand Tour is amazing. It's easy to watch. Especially if you're a Motorhead. And then, like I said, September 13th is going to be the last one. But hopefully they keep it on Amazon Prime for the ages to see because I think it's on an awesome show. But with that, we are going to transition from those sad news, or as Jeremy Clarkson would say, well, that's disappointing. Anyways, we're going to be going to Jargon in a Jiffy, which Jargon in a Jiffy, for those of you that are new to the show, is a word game that Tommy and I play where we take a industry term either from my career or from one of Tommy's careers, either as an EMT or his current as a safety specialist, and we tell each other what the word is. We use it in a sentence, and then the other host has to guess what it is. The whole point of this, I just hit my mic. The whole point of this is to help teach you all about terms that are used in our industry, especially in the airline industry. A lot of the terms can be daunting. They could be intimidating if you don't know, because we have basically our own language. So I'm here to kind of help explain what a lot of those things you may hear in and around pilots. So Tommy D from the hiatus. Sorry, that was hard to say. Why don't you start us off with Jargon and Jiffy? What word you got for me today?
The word I got for you today, Bill, actually comes from the new business unit that I've started working in 5 weeks ago.
Okay.
Um, and I'm having a lot of fun there. If I could get a landing strip there, I could probably get you to just taxi the plane into the warehouse. That's how big it is.
Oh
But
wow.
yeah, it's huge. Uh, it's gonna kind of give it away, but
Okay.
it's a little bit of a stumper. So
Okay.
the word is restuff it conveyor. Restuff it
Okay.
conveyor. Okay. So
Oh,
Bill, can you control the restuff it conveyor so we could bring a truck into the dock.
Restuff it conveyor. Is that putting something back in a truck, like the in a trailer,
Uh,
or is it
b believe it or not,
restuff it?
uh, no. It's actually
Restuff
opposite of
it.
what you're thinking.
Wait, it's to offload something and put it like stuff it in like a pallet or something to move out of the way.
So your first part, yes. Yes, it's
Okay,
to
stuff it in a
offload a
pallet.
truck.
Offload a
Um,
truck. Okay.
yep. Not necessarily to, put it on a pallet.
Okay.
Essentially, the restuff it is you wanna take another crack at it?
No, because that's as close as I could get.
So the restuff it is actually a drivable conveyor that you could bring into the trailer,
Oh.
and, it's all automated. The employee there's 2 employees in the back of a trailer at all times, no one works alone,
Hmm.
and to make life easier, the restuff it goes up and down and can go all the way into a 53-foot trailer, so they don't have to carry boxes out, they literally are just picking them up, putting them on the conveyor, and the conveyor does everything else for them. And when they're done with the truck, they hop on a pressure plate platform on either side, and they just back it out.
Oh, that's really convenient. Did you have those at your
No,
previous
no,
place?
I was in a different type of warehouse where, we had very high, narrow aisles, and we
Okay.
had, different machinery. And the reason
Oh,
why
okay.
I grabbed this is my jargon in a jiffy today. I did overtime last night, and about 2:30 in the morning, I was trained on it, so I actually got to play with it, and I was like a
Oh,
two-year-old.
that's pretty cool. That is pretty awesome. Yeah, I've never heard of that, to be completely honest. Never heard of it. So
Oh,
that's
yeah,
good.
it's, there's a lot of things in there I've never heard of. I'm giving myself 6 months learning curve at this new warehouse.
Okay. Well, see, and that's what Jargon and Jiffy is for, is I learned something new. All right. Now this one, Tommy, for you, from my industry, you'll probably have heard of, but remember, I'm looking for a specific definition. Okay. So the jargon is Cat 3C. Cat 3C. We had to conduct a Cat 3C approach because the visibility was low. So it has to do with visibility. I'm trying to narrow you in, but what does a Cat 3C approach in terms of visibility mean?
I know a category 3 is poor
Mhm.
weather. It is a
Okay, so let's
precision approach.
okay, so let's talk about how many categories are there? Because it's an ILS approach, right? That we're
Yeah.
talking about. Okay,
Oh, man.
so how many categories do we normally have? We have
I
a
am
Cat
so
one,
rusty. Is it
we have a two, right? And we have a
there's a
three.
cat 2, and then is it visual cat 2, cat 3?
Is an ILS visual? Would you ever use an ILS during visual conditions?
Yes, because you taught me that even though you're cleared for a visual approach.
Well, okay, that's backing up, but would we ever get cleared for a visual approach if we had to use an ILS? I know that's a weird question. If you're having to use an ILS to get to the runway, is it visual conditions?
No, it is not. It is below
Okay,
minimums,
so
or
it's
it
not
could
a
be.
visual approach
Right, right, right. Okay, got give me a second, everybody. Little rusty here. Got to get the brain into
to
trying to
aviation mode
match
here.
wits with a real pilot.
Yep, that's me.
um, I know a cat 3. It's isn't it category 3C below minimum approach and autoland?
Well, it's an Autoland. Cat 2 and 3s are Autoland. But what I'm asking is what is the visibility? So Cat 1 could get you down to a certain visibility. Cat 2 can get you down to a certain visibility and height. Cat 3 can get you down to a certain visibility hat and height. And there's a Cat 3A, B, and C. There's like subcategories of a Cat 3. Fun fact, the 737 can't actually do a Cat 3C approach. Airbuses can. We can only do a Cat 3A approach.
Wow, that was a whole lot of letters already.
Yep.
Uh, hang on. I'm not giving up yet.
Like I said, the idea of jargon and Jiffy is to stump the other host. So that's that's why I made it
And let's
complicated.
face it, that's the idea of jargon and jiffly. But personally, you and I may or may not be competitive type of people.
Yeah, no, fair. That's why I'm trying to stump you so I can teach you something.
Mm,
Cat 3C. So, okay, I'll
It
give
is
you
escaping me.
we'll walk it down, okay? So, do you know the approach minimums or like the minimum minimums of a Cat 1 approach?
I
Cat 1
do not.
ILS.
I do not.
Okay, it's 200 and a half statute mile. So the ceiling, and technically for the airlines, visibility is controlling, so half statute mile or 1800 RVR, but 200 is technically the decision altitude. You can't go any lower than 200 feet. Okay.
Okay.
Cat 2, Cat 2 approaches. Okay. 1200 RVR, which is about, let's see, 1200 is probably about 4 or 5. I'm trying to think of because we go into RVR. Once we go below a certain point, it's always RVR, which is runway visual range in feet in the United States. So it's 1200 to 1800 RVR. So that's usually about a quarter mile to half mile of visibility. And a Cat 2 is 100 feet decision altitude or radio altitude, technically. So decision altitude is based off, in the 737, it's based off a barometric altitude, which you set. Radio altimeter is, or radio alt is used with your distance above the ground. So 100 feet above the ground. So Cat 3. Okay. If if Cat 1 was is 200 and a half, right? Cat 2 was 100 and a quarter. Cat 3A, what do you think it's going to be?
50.
Okay, so 50 and what visibility?
I'm gonna go with 50 and a quarter mile
Well, no,
visibility.
quarter was the other one. So the other one was
Eighth of a mile.
1200, right? 1200 RVR. So
Yes.
if you take 1200 divided by 2, like everything else, it gets you down to what?
600.
Right. And technically, we can go down. I can't recall it off the top of my head. We can go down as low as it's 663. So this is getting really technical. I'm not going to dive into it, but there are up to three transmissiometers or things that give us RVR, and they have to read at least 663. So 600, 600, and 300 foot visibility. That's touchdown, midpoint, and rollout. So yeah, so it's 600. So you're right. So 50 and 600 is what we do on the 737. That is a Cat 3A approach. What do you think Cat 3C is?
Oh, it's 300, right? For the
No.
663? No?
No, okay, that's RVR. That's visibility. Right? So if Cat A is 300, Cat 2 was basically like 1200, or Cat 3A, and then Cat 2 was 6 or 1200 and 100 foot ceilings, right? And then Cat 1 was 200. So you see it's halving it, right? So we're already at Cat 3A, which is basically 650 foot RA. What do you think two more levels down would be? Cat 3C.
150, and why is my brain not working?
I'll
My
make it
brain,
easy
like,
for you.
I
Are
just
you
went into vapor lock sitting here thinking
are
about
you
it.
are you when you think of Cat 3 approaches, what type of approaches do you think other than autoland? Low vis, right? If
Low
Cat
vis.
3A, yeah, if Cat 3A is 100 feet and I'm sorry, 50 feet RA and 600 feet visibility, what's the next? If you do two more steps, what's the answer?
Bro, I'm sitting here vapor locked. I can't do math. I can't even do simple math right now.
It's zero visibility. It's zero.
0,
Cat
0?
3C. Yep. That's what a Cat 3C is. And there's only
Interesting.
certain
0,
airplanes,
0.
Airbuses can do it, like I said, but on the 737, we can only do a Cat 3A approach, which I have. I've done a legit Cat 3A to minimums going in Dallas Fort Worth last year in the winter, I believe.
Didn't you text me a couple
It
weeks
was
ago you
down to
shot it down to
minimums.
minimum?
No, I shot a Cat 1 down to minimums
Like 2
week
weeks ago.
last, yeah, something like that. It was going into Portland, Maine. It was at night, and it was a short field landing on a wet runway, crosswind landing, and it was down to Cat 1 minimums, which is 200 and a
That's
half.
right, it was
Yeah.
Portland because I believe we had a, flurry of jokes afterwards.
Yeah. So that is jargon in a jiffy. So remember, Cat 3A is what a 7.3 can do. That's 50 and 600, or technically 663. And then Cat 3C is what the Airbus can do, which is 0, 0. Now, up next, we're going to do a safety stand down, and everybody get buckled in for this one because being back, I want to make sure I do a good job. So, safety stand down is a segment where I take an aircraft accident from the FAA timeline of accidents. So this is officially from the FAA.gov website, and we talk about them in chronological order. Um, of some major ones that contributed to the aviation industry, the airline industry that you do know now. So the one we are talking about today is on January 18th, 1969. It was United 266, which is a Boeing 727 coming out of LAX. So on the 18th of January 1969, United Airlines flight 266 was a Boeing 727 22 Charlie series, which I not don't ask me. I didn't fly the 727, so I have no idea what that Charlie series means, but it was a 727. It was bound for Milwaukee, Wisconsin from LAX, and it crashed into Santa Monica Bay after departure from Los Angeles International, or LAX, and it was at night in light rain and fog. So shortly after takeoff, the crew reported a fire warning in the number one engine, which should be the left engine, and proceeded to shut that engine down, which is a normal thing. An air turn back to Los Angeles was requested, but that was the last voice contact with air traffic control. Approximately 5 seconds after that communication, radar returns from the airplane transponder were lost, and air traffic control radar indicated that the airplane entered a left turn and disappeared from the radar scope within two sweeps. Which two sweeps, it's usually about once every 60 seconds, if I remember correctly. So that's after 2 minutes, it was gone. All 38 passengers and crew members were lost in the tragedy. So let's talk a little bit. So that's the background. That's what happened with that 727. Let's talk a little bit about the background, what could have possibly caused it. So the flight had been dispatched with the number three generator inoperative. So one, two, three, it had three engines. The number three generator was inoperative in accordance with the minimum equipment list and had been operated in that configuration since January 15th, 1969, which was approximately 42 flight hours. So the way these MELs work, or minimum equipment list items work, is there's a cycle limit on them. It's usually nowadays categories A, B, C, or D, and depending on which we get, determines how long you can fly with that MEL before it has to be fixed. United Airlines procedure for this condition required that the galley power, so the galley is where the flight attendants have like the meal carts and ovens and stuff like that. Required that the galley power and one air conditioning pack fan be turned off for takeoff and could be turned on in flight following a flap retraction. This is because of the electrical load. It's basically shedding power so that essential things could work during takeoff. Now, the exact cause of the loss of electrical power could not be determined by the NTSB because of the available evidence. However, the loss of the number two generator is associated with the sudden placement of all three generator bus loads on that generator after the shutdown of the number one engine. So remember, they reported a fire in the number one engine. So if they shut down the number one engine, they only have three. So they shut down one operating. They have one that isn't currently operating. So they just dumped a bunch of electrical load on generator number three, right? So when the number one engine was shut down, electrical power from its generator was lost, leaving the number two generator as the sole source of alternating current power, AC power. The loss of the number two generator would have resulted in the loss of normal direct current as well as AC electrical power, DC and AC power on the airplane. And under such conditions, the standby electrical power system, powered by the airplane battery, would provide the electrical power needed to operate and illuminate basic flight instruments. And for reasons that could not be determined, because remember this is 1969, the standby electrical system power either failed or was not activated for whatever reason. So one scenario involved contrary to the United Airlines procedures. This is them trying to figure out what's going on. So one possible scenario is contrary to the United Airlines procedures, the failure to turn off the galley power and or one air conditioning pack fan prior to takeoff could have caused the complete electrical failure of United 266. So in other words, they failed to do the proper procedure, so they lost all power because it overloaded that one generator. Following the loss of number one generator, all electrical loads would have been transferred to the number two generator, and the additional loads of the galley and or air conditioning pack fans were present, and that generator could have been overloaded and tripped offline. So when these MELs are made, a lot of them are made in a way where if something like this were to fail, the one operating generator should be able to handle the load. And that's where the kind of the confusing part about this accident comes around. It's like, why did that happen specifically? So that's what they're saying here, is that if they didn't follow the system or the MEL properly and made sure that the galley power and the fan were switched off, then when they turned off the number one engine, it tripped off the number two generator or number three generator because it overloaded it. Finally, this is the kind of final scenario. The NTSB could not rule out the possibility that an apparently uncorrected problem in the number three generator system may have been a factor in the loss of the number two generator. The number three system was relatively free of problems until the installation of a new number three generator control panel, which was 5 days prior to the accident. The installed ground control panel had an extensive history of malfunctions for a variety of reasons. Following this change, the number three generator was changed because the field relay would not stay closed. That's the circuit breaker, the contact. So they were having issues with it tripping off by itself and not staying intact. Less than 4 flight hours later, after they installed that generator, the number three generator was rendered inoperative because of that reason. They were having trouble keeping that generator tack closed, or the contact closed. And that indicated to the NTSB that the problem was not corrected and probably was associated with the control panel that they installed prior to that. Now, the probable cause of the accident, as found by the NTSB at the time in 1969, was that the flight crew probably got disoriented because it was a foggy night coming out of LAX, and if they were launching most likely towards the ocean, there was no visible reference to the horizon. Right? When you lose that, all sorts of illusions happen, and it's really hard to maintain level flight or safe, I guess, a safe flight attitude, a normal flight attitude. One scenario is that not contradicted by the available evidence, so this is a serious possibility, was that the inadvertent placement of the battery switch to the off position by the flight engineer during attempts to remove galley loads from the generator buses. So the galley switches were similar in shape and size and were located on the flight engineer's upper panel in close proximity to the battery switch. I have talked about this multiple times. I don't know if it was on here, but with other pilots, there are a lot of switches, even in the Boeing 737 that I fly, that have the same feel, the same shape. Perfect example is your anti-ice for your engine cowl are the same switch and cover as your hydraulic pumps. And there has been, not at my airline, I think it was Southwest, but people in the past who have accidentally turned off the hydraulics while trying to switch off the engine cowl anti-ice switches, which is not a big thing. You just turn them back on, they're fine. But that's why, even in primary flight training, I always taught my students and myself, you say what you're going to do, you're going to look, touch, and you're verifying that that's what you're trying to do. So say, look, touch, and once you verify that's the switch that you want, then you can move the switch. It's a good practice. But that might have been a possibility that while this scenario was going on and the flight engineer, who's the third person in the flight deck, is trying to shed buses to get the generator to come back online, may have accidentally turned off the battery, which would have disabled the standby electrical system, which basically powers the essential instruments like an attitude indicator and basic lights so that the flight crew can see, and then completely failed all the instruments. It was a completely dark black cockpit when this accident occurred. So what came of this is Amendment 121-60 and Part 121, which is what regulates airlines, that flight navigational equipment requires a third attitude indicator whose operation is independent of the electrical generating system. So completely separate on its own power source in order to provide a source of backup attitude information just in case we have a complete electrical failure. Then there was an emergency airworthiness directive mandated the replacement of the battery switch with a detent lock type or installed guard over the switch, so you couldn't accidentally switch off the battery when you're trying to shed the battery or the electrical power during the electrical failure. And then this also revised the emergency procedures for the Boeing 727 at the time to provide flight crews with more enhanced procedures for dealing with the loss of all generators. And also the FAA or the NTSB recommendations required modification of this came up from the accidents, but now required modification of the generator control panel for the purpose of filtering out electrical interference that could, under overload conditions, disable the generator before opening the bus tie breaker. Oh, that was a lot. Tommy, what do you think? Thoughts, comments?
It actually bothers me a lot since you know me and my love for that aircraft. My
Yeah,
favorite.
well, the last
But
one we talked about out of Salt Lake City was also, no, I think that was a 707. We talked about, last one was where the lightning struck the wing,
yes, but I
and
believe the one
caused
previous to that was also a 7 too.
it was a 727. Yeah, 707. This is a 727. So, but yeah,
So
it just goes to show how much we have progressed in the aviation industry in terms of safety. And unfortunately, as I always say with safety stand down, our regulations are written in blood. And that's
literally,
what that means is the regulations are usually as a result of someone dying. That's how aviation works, unfortunately, because usually the new implementations are expensive. So a lot of there's a lot of fighting and resistance against changes in the industry unless it's a safety thing that, like this, like the Max and stuff like that. The Max, once again, I'll say it over and over again, Boeing was at fault 100%. Um, but it took two airplanes crashing and plane loads of people dying for the government to look into it and realize that Boeing is Boeing was doing something wrong, right?
Yeah.
But that's the purpose of this segment, so you guys understand how far we've come and where all the things that we do come from. So when people are saying, "Hey, lower the hiring requirements from 1,500 hours back down to 200, 300 hours," we'll get into those accidents a little bit later. We're trying to go in chronological order. You understand where I'm coming from when I'm saying don't remove them. We need every safety measure there is out there, and experience, especially in aviation, your experience flight hours is a huge contributing factor to your understanding of how things work and your situational awareness when you're in the flight deck. So that is safety stand down for today. We are, like I said, it was a long one. That's why I told you to buckle up, because I wanted to make sure I did it right for us returning back live on air. Up next, we're going to be doing our live listener Q&A. Talk to some of our people here. Franco says, "Congratulations, Bill." Thank you, Franco, for congratulating me on my upgrade. K-Bird says hello. And Franco said he was over there screaming zero visibility for Jargon and Jiffy. Thanks, Franco. Tommy could have used your help there.
And
Let's see,
sorry,
Tommy.
Franco, I didn't hear you.
Tommy, do you got anything on your channels? No
No,
real
I do
questions that
not.
I can see. Okay, cool. So with that, we will now move into the meat and potatoes of this week's discussion topic. This week's episode is called "Glorifying Darkness: Joseph Emerson, a pilot mental health martyr or criminal." Now, if you guys remember, former captain at Alaska Airlines, Joseph Emerson, was the pilot who was claimed that he was suffering from a mental health crisis, was on mind-altering drugs, and attempted, while jump seating on a Horizon Air 175 from Seattle to San Francisco, attempted to disable the aircraft engines by pulling the fire handles on the overhead, um, and was promptly removed from the flight deck, and then tried to open a flight attendant emergency exit door at the back, where they then had to restrain him in order to keep him from doing anything other dangerous and killing the other 83 people that were on board. So the name of the episode is called "Glorifying Darkness." And I texted Tommy, I said, "Hey, if you have access to this documentary, there's a new documentary now on Disney Plus and Hulu by New York Times called Light of Fly." And I asked Tommy to talk about it or look at it and watch it. And so we can get our takes on it. And that's where the name of the episode comes from, "Glorifying Darkness." Um, I guess the question is, Tommy, when you watched that, how did you feel about the documentary? To put it in perspective, I felt that they were taking someone who did something extremely dangerous and giving him a platform. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. What do you
Wow.
think?
Wow. Now you see, I see it from two different angles.
Hmm.
I understand you went in to watch a documentary objectively, but let's face it, you're an airline pilot. So
Right.
there's that in your mind, okay?
Correct. Yeah.
I went in to watch it objectively. I'm a healthcare professional,
Yep. It's two different. That's
okay?
why I thought this would be a great topic to
Yeah,
discuss.
and I can say without a shadow of a doubt, I 100% agree with you that they're giving him a platform for this, because regardless of what it was that brought him to get to that point, he had the mind-altering drugs. I believe it was 48 hours prior to that jump seat flight, if I remember the time
Yep.
frame correctly.
Yep.
And although I actually did some research when I got home from work this morning to look, um, the mind-altering drugs that were mentioned in the documentary, which, by the way, we recommend the documentary if you have the means to watch it. It was actually well done, even though it's a platform. But
Yeah, and I'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, I'll
yeah,
talk about that. How I feel about that in a
he was
second.
still within the realm of that being in his system. Like it,
Well, I'm not talking about like what he did. I'm talking about more about, should we be giving someone who just attempted to kill 73 innocent or 83 innocent people, including my fellow flight crew members? should we even be entertaining a platform? I think
No,
that's the discussion.
no,
Is
absolutely not. By all means, get
because
him the help he needs,
yeah, because
but don't give
my
him a
wife
soapbox.
has her undergrad degree in psychology, her master's in social work, and she's a licensed clinical social worker in my state. Right, so we watch it together. So you got a pilot and someone who has lots of background in this sort of thing, and I was extremely appalled. I thought it was going to be shedding more light onto what the scenario was, what it was, but to see Joseph Emerson on that show talking about how it was the FAA's fault that this happened, basically, that it was the fear of the
Yes.
repercussions of what was happening to the FAA was the reason why he did it. He almost killed 83 innocent people. And there was a couple instances where he's like smiling. I'm
Yeah.
like, how are you smiling? Like how can you sit down and stare at the camera, and obviously the people who are watching have sat down and said, "Oh, well, I wasn't in my right state of mind. I didn't think this was real." Smile. So the only way I thought I could do this was by pulling the handle. Well, the reason I didn't seek help was because of the repercussions and the archaic nature of the FAA's medical certification system. Okay, two things. One, I 100% agree, and we did, it's episode number 5 called The Gray Matter. We did a whole breakdown on the facts and myths behind mental health, pilot mental health, and the FAA. I do agree it's archaic. The big thing that needs to change is the time for processing. Right now, it takes way too long just to even start the first step of recovering your medical to from having a or stepping back and having like mental issues, right? Or a mental health crisis, we'll call it. I do agree with that 100%. But I also advocate for seeking help yourself. And this is where I draw the line. And this is where Joseph Emerson and there's certain other TikToker I'm not going to mention that Tommy and I have talked about where they've made it very clear on social media. In this case, Thomas or Joseph Emerson is making his case on a New York Times documentary where they're blaming the system for what they could have stopped. The moment of airline pilot or any pilot that's responsible for the safety of others, including their passengers and flight crew members, makes the conscious decision to disclose or not disclose, excuse me, a disqualifying, whether it be medication, mental health issue, medical issue, so on and so forth. At that point, they've crossed the line of putting what we're charged with safety in front of their selfishness. The reason, and he says it in the documentary, which just irritates me, is him and his wife were afraid of the financial loss they would get. They said, "Oh well, we'd only be paying half the amount he normally does." That is not a reason to step on a flight deck or in a jump seat, knowing that you've had mind altering drugs, mushrooms in this case, knowing that you're mentally depressed, having thoughts of suicide, etc. That is no excuse as a flight deck, as a professional, as a pilot, to step on the flight deck and fly a plane when you're responsible for 200 plus people behind you. Period. That is the line I draw. Or when you blatantly lie to the FAA so that you try to circumnavigate the system, like in another, like not disclosing something, for example, removing something for your record, thinking, oh, they'll never find out, and then you have one AME who does what he's supposed to, maybe digs a little bit deeper, finds it, calls you out on it, you lose your medical, but then now you're on social media saying, oh, it's because of the FAA system. No, you screwed yourself into that. Period. So, and that is my problem with this documentary. I was absolutely appalled throughout the entirety because one, they're glorifying what I consider a criminal. Is he an example of what's wrong with the FAA system or of what's wrong with pilots? Well, and not
Mm.
even with pilots, I would say. I would say with him because the FAA has its issues, but what happened was because of him. And a good point too is social media loves to point out that the FAA is archaic and it's all the FAA system's fault. It's making pilots lie about their mental health, so on and so forth. But realistically, there are pilots out there who have taken the proper steps, have realized that mental health wise, which is a real thing, mental health is a very important thing, has realized that their mental health is not safe to fly people around who trust us to fly them safely, have stepped away from the flight deck, talked to the FAA, have gone through the proper channels, and are still fighting for their medical to get back, which I 100% support those people. But they're also using that fight, that experience to be able to, and then properly use social media to explain that experience and then say, this is how I'm trying to help reform with the FAA. That uh, I 100% support. But in Joseph Emerson's case, I'm trying to stay on topic here. On Joseph Emerson's case, he 100% knew something was wrong. He lost his best friend, right? And the way we handle grief individually, it all varies. I mean, Tommy, with his EMT career, knows this. We all handle loss differently. Some better than others, right? But the moment you realize, especially, and it doesn't have to be a pilot, you could be a train operator, you could be an EMT, someone who is responsible for other people's lives. As soon as you realize that your mental health, it may, even in the slightest, smallest chance, cause death, great bodily harm, or injury to somebody else because of your mental health, that's when you hit the pause button. Get the big pause button and go pause, right? Take a step back. Remember, and I said this in episode number 5, your mental health is way more important than your paycheck. And we have, as airline pilots, we have this thing called long-term disability. If you lose your medical, you qualify for long-term disability, which is generally about 50% of your paycheck. Yeah, it's a pay cut, but that's not precluding you going to get another job while you're waiting to get your medical back to supplement that income. The excuse of, oh, we're only going to make 50% of our income if I tell the FAA I have a mental health crisis is unexcusable. There is no excuse for that. Joseph Emerson, I'm talking to you. That's not an excuse. Another thing is his wife knew. That was huge. Then my wife and I were talking about this the entire thing. I told her, I said, if you ever see me, if anything ever happens, and you see me going down this spiral, you need to sit me aside and tell me that you're not going to fly if I'm not seeing it, which I feel confident enough in myself that I would be able to remove myself from the flight deck if anything like that happened. And then I told her, I said, if I refuse, the next thing you need to do is call my company and then the FAA. You need to make sure this never happens to me, because his wife, Joseph Emerson's wife, just let it happen. She watched it happen. Then he goes to somewhere in the woods, right, Tommy?
Yes.
And does drugs with his friends
Mm-hmm. Beta
because he
bender.
feels, and a bender, right? And he claims in the whole thing, he goes, "Oh, it's the first time I'm around drugs." No, bro, bro,
Yeah,
you're not
yeah.
you're not fooling anybody.
Now you
Okay.
see, this is where the EMS worker in me came out, and it came out full force
Yeah.
because I can't say it on the
Hmm.
podcast the way it ran through my mind, but you
Yeah.
know me long enough to know what the words coming out of my mouth were.
Yep. And that's the thing. As soon as, oops, sorry, that was me. As soon as I saw it, right, I turned to my wife. As soon as he said that one thing of, "Oh, I've never done drugs before," I looked at him like, Really? So how do your friends?" By the way, who were pilots? There were pilots, other pilots in that little hut or whatever he was in the middle of nowhere,
It was like a
also doing
hunting
shrooms.
cabin or something like
Yeah,
that.
doing shrooms. They were all doing it. They were all doing drugs, right? Other pilots. And then so I'm sitting there going, okay, there's no way, one, that you're just, for the documentary, so you've never done it before for legal reasons. But let's be honest, right? Let's be honest with ourselves. Then this is the part that kills me too. And I'm hoping there's some sort of civil or criminal liability that goes with those pilots. His friends, quote unquote friends, the ones that dropped him off the airport were pilots. They knew he wasn't in a mental capacity or in a safe mental state to even be jump seating. He should have never listed for the flight deck jump seat. If you're having a trip, brother, I, obviously I don't recommend flying if you're on it, on drugs, but sit in the back. Don't put yourself in the flight deck. Like, how dumb. And his friends let him do it. They dropped him off at the airport and said, yeah, he was fine to fly. I think his friends should have some sort of criminal liability, if I'm being 100% honest, because they allowed that to happen if they haven't already lost their jobs. That's just unbelievable that they allowed, knowing how dangerous that was, right? So then he gets in, and they interviewed the gate agent and stuff. They said he was fine. They didn't think he was having an issue or anything like that. He just walked on. It wasn't having an issue. And then in the flight, I think they said on the flight deck voice recorder, you hear him say, "I need to wake up," and the captain's like, "What?" And he goes, "I need to go home. I want to go home." And then he reaches up and pulls the fire handles. And luckily, the captain and the first officer were quick to flip them back, because once you until you turn them, it's not permanent damage. When you just drop them down like that, it just closes a couple valves. But if you're quick about it, it'll reopen them before the engine shuts down. And the captain looked at the FO and said, "You're bigger than I. I am. I think you need to handle this." And under his own will, Emerson then said, "Hey, you guys want me out of the cockpit? I'll get out of the cockpit." Then he gets out. He goes to the aft flight attendant door and puts his hand on the handle like he's going to open it. And the flight attendant grabbed his arm, and he told the flight attendant, "I need you to handcuff me or use the flex cuffs because I don't know what's real anymore."
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's, which, okay, he's having a mental health crisis, but once again, tried to kill 83 people. Right. And like I
Okay.
said, where I take it personally is he also was trying to kill innocent flight crew members. There were two pilots, two flight attendants, my fellow crew members on those flights. I don't know them personally, but we're all crew members. That's where I draw the line. That's where this whole, "Oh, well, it wasn't really my fault. It's because of the FA system that I decided to not tell them and almost kill people." I lost empathy, period.
Oh, once they got to the portion of the documentary where they were out in the woods, and this is where I went with it, right? So now I really, because I knew this was going to be the main topic of the show, and I
Hmm.
promise you, I really, really tried to remain 100% objective in this. Unfortunately, instincts take over, and my
Yeah.
way of thinking is my way of thinking. Now, you and I have openly disagreed and agreed to disagree
Hmm.
about certain things on this show, but you and I are very, very aligned on this, and my reasoning is different because just the
Hmm.
way you're calling them your fellow crew members, and a American airline pilot is a fellow crew member to you, an EMT in California is my brother or sister. So that
Right.
same
Hmm.
camaraderie exists. So that base is
Yeah.
down. One, you did this yourself, dude. You willingly took the shrooms. Now, you want to go out to a hunting cabin in the middle of the woods and have a kegger with your boys? I am in no position to tell anyone how to live. It's your life.
Right.
Have
Hmm.
at it. You willingly took shrooms.
And
My gut
yeah.
says you did this before, and this started when your best friend suddenly and inexplicably passed away from a
Yeah.
heart arrhythmia, okay? Everyone in their lifetime, unfortunately, feels that loss, and like Bill said,
Yep.
some of us can cope differently than others. Me, unfortunately, I'm a lot more callous because of where I come from career-wise, because it was
Yeah.
something
Being
that
an
I didn't deal
EMT.
with daily, but I
Yep.
dealt with it, like, right
Yeah.
then and there. So
Yep.
there was that. I agree. His buddies need some sort of reprimand
Yep.
because they were just like, and to me, that's just a cover up. Oh, the union's not going to find out. The airline's not going to find out. So now I look at it and I'm looking at his buddies going, so how this not, they're not going to find out work out for you. The other
Yeah.
portion, I'm still questioning. I agree that there's a mental health crisis going on for multiple reasons, multiple triggers that I
Hmm.
could see from his perspective and words and his wife's words throughout the documentary. But listening to the AME, to me, the AME dig di ah, did dig a little deeper, which is his right to do, because either the hairs on the back of his neck or something in his gut did not feel right, and he felt it needed it necessary. So kudos to that AME for doing what he needed to do.
Oh, that Amy. Wait, are you talking about the document? The Amy had to do with the TikToker I was talking about, not Joseph Emerson.
Yeah, we could apply that to there too, to that,
Okay, I
but
was because the Amy had this had nothing to do with the AME.
yeah,
It
I'm
wasn't
sorry, I'm
anywhere
sorry.
near a
There's
medical.
2 trains of thought. You gotta remember, man, I'm still,
Yeah, that's fine. No, I was just, yeah,
coping
that
with
was,
the off-body chemistry. But,
yeah, no, that was just a different, that was a
you
different
know,
kind of scenario.
the half the half paycheck thing also pissed me off. But what really, really got me was, dude, you did it to yourself.
Yeah.
You
And did it take
100% made
yeah.
the conscious decision to get stoned. Be a
Yep.
man, own up to it. By all means, get the mental health help that you need, all available help that is available to you, you know,
Yeah.
but
And
not for nothing. Be a man,
there's
man
tons.
up.
Well, and not just that, that's a little toxic, but it's and that's the thing. It is available. There's a tons of resources available. I went over it in episode number 5, the gray matter. All the facts that are, facts versus myth, or what everybody talks about, what they fear about reporting a mental health issue to the FAA, and the process to recovering from it, or recovering your medical from it. It's there. There are resources out there, and like I said, the mentality of I'm not going to report it because I don't want the FAA to know, that's not the right mentality. That's it's You got to be honest in this job. We're charged with the responsibility for me of upwards of to like 180 passengers a flight. I am not, if there's something that's jeopardizing my mental health, I'm going to remove myself where I'm going to help or hurt others, right? Which means, it could be me taking a mental wellness, a couple days off, calling sick. If it's something that's prolonged, then going to see somebody about it, maybe just talk about it. And then if medication comes up, which a lot of it is the medication side of things, if you get diagnosed or have medication with one of the disqualifying things, notify your AME. Period. Because if Joseph Emerson had done that, would he be out of a medical? Yeah, he could probably right now be still working back towards getting his medical back. But eventually he might, and he would have a job. He would be making long term disability. And once he got it back, he'd probably still be employed by Alaska. But guess what? Because he chose to go get stoned, which is okay, right? If that's your way of coping, whatever, you shouldn't be flying an airplane, my personal opinion. But then give yourself enough time to not have it affect the safety of a flight you're jump seating on. Like, think about that for a second. You made so many wrong decisions leading up to that point. And then on top of that, at that point, now he's not going to be able to get hired ever again. Although the documentary did say there is a union grievance out where he is trying to get his job back with Alaska.
Good luck with that.
Uh, yeah, let me tell you how that's going to go. Right. And not to mention, he's probably not going to get hired by anybody else ever because of this. It could have so what could have been a 4 to 5 year ordeal trying to recover your medical, making half pay, has now turned into him never going to be able to fly again. He is actually currently not allowed within 30 feet of an operating aircraft. That was terms of his release when he got bailed. Well, he's bailed out awaiting federal charges right now. So
Yeah,
he's out
yeah.
from jail. But that was the condition. He can't be within 30 feet of an operating aircraft. And that's him for the rest of his life.
No,
Not to
that's too
mention if
close.
there's jail, right? So 4 to 5 years versus a lifetime of not doing what you love, and everybody knowing you as a person who nearly killed 83 innocent people because you were on shrooms. Which one would you rather choose, right? If you want to talk about absolutes, I don't know about you. I would choose the first one. I don't want the second one, right? I
Yeah, I don't
want the
want the second
opportunity
one
to
anywhere near.
yeah, I want the opportunity to recover my career in the future, even though nobody ever said it was going to be easy. They just said it was going to be worth it, right? You've ever heard that? It's
Mhm.
that's what it is. So, and that's why we're talking about glorifying darkness. I didn't personally appreciate. I knew people. The reason they probably did the documentary was because people were going to watch it. Like myself, I was just curious to see what it was about, but I was absolutely appalled throughout the most of it, the way they spun it. And I don't know if it was them or if it was Emerson and Emerson's family that was trying to spin it that way. And then maybe the producer just wanted to do it that way because it's controversial, and controversy sells nowadays in terms of programming. But the way that they spun it as, well, it wasn't his fault. He's not really taking responsibility for what he did. And then his wife also now is lobbying Congress. So now she has a new career lobbying Congress for pilot mental health advocacy. Even though her husband, she was part of the problem. She should have recognized the signs. She knew he was struggling. You know what I mean? And maybe it's just communication or whatever it was, but that's why I told my wife, I said, if you ever see me spiraling like this, you need to tell me because I'll listen to my wife. If she tells me, hey, you shouldn't be flying an airplane, I'm going to step back. And if not, I told her the steps to get ahead of it to make sure I don't enter a flight deck in that mental state if I'm having a mental health crisis. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was something because when you texted me, I wanna say it was Monday or Tuesday about watching the documentary
yep.
because, we were in the process of planning the, triumphant comeback here where my camera ain't
Hammer
working.
isn't working. Yeah.
But, I really thought because I know your mind. So I really thought, "Wow, we got a documentary that's actually going to go into the investigative investigative portion of this incident." I'm like, "Cool."
Mhm. That's what I
And then
thought.
I see him and I'm like, "Well, you're not investigating your own incident." And then you watch it,
Yeah.
you watch it, you watch it, and I'm like and I'm looking at him like, "Dude, really?
Yep. And I
Really?"
and I made sure to tell Tommy. I didn't tell Tommy what it was about. Period. I just said, "Hey, do you have access to?" I think the text says, "Hey, do you have Disney Plus or
Or
Hulu?"
Hulu. Yeah.
And he said yes. I said, "Okay, you need to watch this documentary. I want to talk about it on Friday."
Which, by the
That's
way,
all
my
you knew.
coworkers enjoyed it. I'm just throwing that in there as a side note.
I mean, it's a good documentary. It's well put together. It's the like if I was just normal person, just kind of watching it, that doesn't have a background in aviation or the medical field, or in my wife's case, the psychology field, then I'd have been okay with it. I wouldn't know any different, but just the magnitude of what he did and the downplaying, and then they're trying to turn it so he has a platform to kind of spin around on. He
And
shouldn't be on
accepts
a
no
pedestal. He should
blame.
be thrown in the pits. You know what I mean?
And accepts no blame. It was
No
everyone
blame.
else's fault.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing. Own it. You made the mistake. The moment you went from being a martyr necessarily to being a criminal, Joseph Emerson, is the moment you chose not to remove yourself from the flight deck. Because there's only one person who can make that call when you're a pilot, and that's you. That you have to take your mental health and your health in general seriously especially when you're an airline pilot. You have to sit there and go, am I safe to fly? The amount of time I've called in sick a couple times at my airline, because I've had like one time I had a sty. I woke up and my left eye was swollen shut.
I
Had
remember
no
that.
idea. Yeah, you remember that? I had no idea. I'd
Mhm.
never had that before. So I had to fly, I think in 2 days, and it wasn't getting better. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to get better, but the last thing I want is to be up at altitude and cruising altitude. And because of the pressure difference, my eye is now swollen shut and I'm in excruciating pain to the point where I'm going to have to declare a medical emergency for an incapacitated crew member and then divert somewhere, right? Because that's not only a headache for me, that's going to be a headache for the company, right? And it's not safe. If I can't see or if I can't function as a first officer, then I am not contributing safety wise to the flight deck. So I made the choice, and there was a gamble. It's like, well, it could be better by the time I get out there. It just might be. I said no. I'm not. I'm not doing this because I'm not gambling the safety of others because I want to get paid, and I did get paid. It just came out of my sick time. But that's the point. That's the process. The only person that can actually make that determination that you're not safe to fly is you. So if you're a pilot watching this or listening to this on Spotify or one of the other platforms, and you are questioning whether or not you should be flying in a flight deck, step away from the flight deck, go get help. Period. Because like I said, the moment you become from being a martyr or somebody who's an advocate for pilot mental health in the current system to becoming a criminal is that moment where you decide to disregard safety of others for your own selfish gain, like pay and so on, and losing your career and so on and so forth. So, like I
Mhm.
said, that's the line of respect for me. So, if you're experiencing that now, go watch episode 5. There's tons of information on how to get help, as well as specifically pilots' websites out there about how recovering and the process of reporting a mental health crisis and the process of recovering your medical. So, definitely go check that out. But with that, once again, a very passionate discussion from Tommy D and I talking about Joseph Emerson, the former Alaskan Airlines captain who tried to take down a Embraer 175 from Horizon Air because of a mental health crisis that resulted in a psychedelic trip with mushrooms, as he claims. But with that, folks, we're going to conclude episode number 28, Glorifying Darkness. And we do thank you for joining us this week. If you enjoyed this week's show, please let us know by rating the show on the respective platform you're listening on. For Spotify users, at the top of the podcast page near the notification bell, hit the 3 dots and select Rate Show. For Apple Podcast users, scroll all the way to the bottom of the podcast page to give your rating and review. And if you're watching us live today and would like to review the show, please feel free to rate the show on Spotify or Apple Podcast as well. If you want to stay up to date with us on for the show and industry news, follow us on Twitter at Torque, the letter N. TS. It's right here on the scroll tape beneath me. Twitter at Torque and Thrust Talk Show. We do all sorts of updates and stuff on there as well. If you'd like to follow the show for on the go entertainment and news, follow and turn on notifications for the talk show on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and iHeartRadio. And feel free to follow Tommy D and myself on YouTube, Twitch, and TikTok. I'm at Captain Bill Official, and Tommy D is at Level Flight Simulations. Our next live show will be Friday, September 13th at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. And on behalf of the Torque and Thrust Talk Show, I am Bill.
I am Tommy.
And we will see you next week.